Hello, my name is Debbie Smith, and today I am going to talk to you about one of the basic research tools for a genealogist, the U.S. Census records. The census records are usually one of the first records that a genealogist turns to when beginning research on a new ancestor. Census records are the low-hanging fruit. They're the giver of clues. They are the friend of the genealogist. But oftentimes, researchers don't look beyond the names, ages, and places of birth, especially if the headings are difficult to read. Some genealogists never access the early census records because they only give you tick marks instead of actual names. In this presentation, we will explore all the wonderful information contained in the census records, because the census records are so much more than just names and places, so much more than just tick marks. In this presentation, we will be exploring the population schedules for the U.S. Census records. Now, that's the population schedules. There are other non-population schedules that you should be considering and researching, but today's presentation will only cover the population schedules. The census was taken every 10 years beginning in 1790. The instructions given to the enumerator or the census taker varied from year to year, resulting in both similar and different information being collected and available on the schedules. In researching the census records, it is important to keep a few things in mind, so this presentation will be addressing each of the following as we go through the census from year to year. First, it is important to know the official date of that year's census, as the census taker was instructed to obtain the information as of that date. For example, if the census date was June 1st, but the census taker did not visit the household until August 15th, all information was to be collected as of June 1st. So if a child was born in July of that year, that child should not be included in the household. On the other hand, if a person had been living in the household on June 1st, but had passed away in July, then that person should be included in the household. It is also important to note which states and territories were included in the enumeration of any given census year. The United States only began with 13 original states and added new territories and new states over the years. Boundary lines were continuously changing, and you need to keep that in mind when researching the early census records. The other issue was that not all schedules that were taken have survived. Some records have been lost to war, to neglect, or even fire. As we explore the various years, I will attempt to provide you with a listing of the schedules that were lost. And finally, I will be summarizing the questions that were asked by the enumerators, as well as pointing out information that may be unique or of special interest or value to the genealogist. The information and clues that are gleaned from the census records allow the genealogist to build out their family tree. Depending on the census year, we might be able to add branches and leaves to our tree. We are able to learn about their occupations, land holdings, literacy, and even ailments. The clues provided by the census records could lead us to search for other records that will bring our ancestors to life. The census was taken every 10 years, allowing us to track our ancestors through time and from place to place. And while it may be the genealogist who accesses the census records frequently and on a regular basis, the original purpose of the census had nothing to do with researching your family history or finding clues for your paternal third great-grandfather. Nope, sorry to say, but when the founding fathers first proposed a census, The benefits to future genealogists wasn't even considered. The newly created United States simply wanted a plan to count its people and use that count to establish and determine representation in Congress. And so, on March 1st, 1790, President George Washington, Vice President John Adams, and Speaker of the House Frederick Muhlenberg signed the 1790 Census Act. The first census was conducted in 1790 with an official census date of August 2nd, 1790. The Marshals, under the direction of Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson, took the census in the 13 original states, plus the districts of Kentucky, Maine, and Vermont, and in the Southwest Territory, which is now the state of Tennessee. However, there are no known schedules that exist today for the states of Delaware, Georgia, Kentucky, New Jersey, Tennessee, or Virginia. And some say they were apparently destroyed during the War of 1812 when the British attacked Washington. There are other reports, however, that the loss was actually due to poor handling or neglect on the part of the clerks of the federal district courts. Whichever is the cause, the result's the same: substantial record loss for the 1790 census. Beginning genealogists often are tempted to overlook the early census schedules because they only contain so-called tick marks in the columns rather than any concrete information. But if you spend a little time familiarizing yourself with what those tick marks stand for, you can obtain some valuable clues to help in your research. In 1790, the marshals were tasked with visiting each household and documenting the number of persons in such household by asking 6 questions. Name of the head of the family, number of free white males age 16 and older, number of free white males under the age of 16, number of free white females, number of other persons, which included Indians who were taxed, and the number of slaves. Notice that only free white males were counted in 2 separate categories: age 16 and older and aged under 16. The purpose for this separation was to assess the country's industrial and military potential. At the time of the 1790 census, there were no standard forms for the marshals to use when writing down the information. So they would use whatever paper was available, and that paper typically did not include the headings. But in order to understand the information contained in the census schedules, it is important that we know what information was recorded in the different columns. There are form worksheets available from several websites, including the Family Search Wiki, that provide the headings to assist you in analyzing and documenting these early census records. I have included the URL for the forms on Family Search in your handout. The census schedule shown here is from Iredell County in North Carolina, which includes my ancestor William McHarg near the bottom of page 395. Based on the questions the marshals were instructed to ask, we find that William McHarg was head of the family, and included in his household were 1 free white male age 16 and older, 4 free white males under 16, and 1 free white female. There are no other free persons and no slaves in William's household. Now, even though it is not stated, we can hypothesize that William is probably the free white male age 16 and older. And we can hypothesize that the free white female could be his wife. And I say could be because there is no age range available for the females. and there is a possibility that the wife may have passed away, and this entry actually represents a daughter. Could also be William's mother, or it could be some other female. The 4 white males under the age of 16 are probably William's sons. Now, I descend from William's son Alexander, who was born in 1777. Alexander would have been about 13 in 1790, and he was of the right age to be one of the 4 males under the age of 16 in William's household. By using the number of persons within a household, the 1790 census provides us with clues for identifying our target family, and we can separate them from other families of the same name. You can identify slaveholders, which could lead to other records, and you can identify neighbors, unless, of course, the census taker rearranged the names into a semi-alphabetic listing, as is seen here. The second census of the United States had an official date of August 4th, 1800. This census covered 16 states, including the new states of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vermont, as well as the territory northwest of the Ohio River, Indiana Territory, and the Mississippi Territory. The inhabitants of the District of Columbia were included in the enumeration of the state of Maryland. But again, there has been heavy record loss, and missing schedules and records are included for the states of Georgia, Tennessee, Kentucky, New Jersey, Virginia, the Indiana Territory, the Mississippi Territory, and virtually all of the Northwest Territory. Only Washington County records from the Northwest Territory survive. As in 1790, the 1800 census takers were to record the name of the head of the household. But as you can see, there were several additional columns added in 1800. Since the headings were rarely included on the schedules, accessing a worksheet will assist with identification of the columns. Unlike 1790, in 1800, both free white males and females were recorded separately by different age groups: under age 10, age 10 to 16, age 16 to 26, age 26 to 45, and age 45 and older. Other free persons and slaves, however, were still listed only by total number, excuse me, and not divided into age groups. Again, we find William McCarg enumerated in Iredell County, North Carolina. Included in his household in 1800 were 2 free white males aged 10 to 16, 1 free white male aged 16 to 26, 1 free white male aged 45 and older, and 1 free white female aged 26 to 45. There also is now a listing for 1 slave. The female listed in William's 1800 household was aged 26 to 45, supporting our hypothesis that the female in his 1790 census could have been his wife. And when comparing this 1800 census to that of William's 1790 household, only 3 of the 4 young males were still listed. William's son, Alexander, born 1777, would have been about 23 years old in 1800. And it appears he is numerated in his own household, shown here, where he was listed with a possible wife and a possible young son and daughter. We now have a clue that Alexander may have been married between 1790 and 1800. And based on his age and possibility of having 2 children, he was probably married between 1795 and 1797. Narrowing in on a 2-year span for a possible marriage in the late 1700s. See? Valuable clues based solely on using those pesky little tick marks of the early census records. Beginning on August 6, 1810, and lasting 10 months, the 1810 census covered 17 states and the District of Columbia, as well as the territories of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Orleans. The schedules that are missing and presumed lost are for the District of Columbia, Georgia, Indiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, New Jersey, Ohio, Tennessee, and part of Illinois. The legislation that authorized the 1810 census made a provision that an assistant marshal had to actually visit each household in his enumeration district and could no longer rely on hearsay to complete the actual schedules. But the information that was collected did not change from the 1800 census. The name of the head of household was recorded, as well as free white males and free white females separated in the same age categories. Other free persons and slaves were still only recorded by number and not divided into age groups. Alexander McCarg was once again enumerated in Iredell County, North Carolina. His household consisted of 2 free white males under 10, 1 free white male aged 10 to 16, 1 free white male aged 26 to 45, 1 free white female under 10, and 1 free white female aged 26 to 45. When comparing Alexander's 1810 household to 1800, it appears likely that 2 more sons were born, as well as a daughter. Hypothesizing that the 1 free white female under 10 was a daughter born between 1800 and 1810, it would suggest that the young female enumerated in 1800 may have died. Otherwise, we would expect to see an entry in the free white female age 10 to 16 category. By comparing 2 census years and using clues obtained from only the tick marks, we are able to hypothesize the death of Alexander's young daughter between the ages of 1800 and 1810, during a time when death records did not exist. The 4th census of the United States was taken in accordance with the Act of March 14, 1820, and the official census day was August 7th of that same year. By 1820, 6 new states had been added to the Union: Alabama, Mississippi, Illinois, Indiana, Louisiana, and Maine. There were now a total of 23 states, and they were they were part of the enumeration in 1820, and also were the territories of Arkansas, Michigan, and Missouri. However, there were district-wide losses of the schedules for the Arkansas Territory, Missouri Territory, and the state of New Jersey, as well as partial losses of schedules for Alabama and Tennessee. As in the past, there was no standard forms used by the assistant marshals as they visited the households to conduct the census of 1820. Sometimes the headings were included on each sheet, and sometimes they were not. In this example, they were shown, but they're very difficult to read. But you can see that the number of columns, the amount of information collected by the census taker, was definitely expanded for 1820. The questions now included age groupings for not only free white males and females, but also for male and female slave inhabitants and male and female free colored inhabitants. All other persons except Indians not taxed were still listed in one undivided category. Another unique age listing added for 1820 was a category of free white males of 16 years but under 18, and a category for free white males of 16 years but under 26 years. It is great information for narrowing down the age of a male aged 16 and 17 in 1826. But those ages were also included in the next category. So did that mean that 16 and 17-year-old males were enumerated in both categories and therefore enumerated twice? Yep. And that is a very important aspect to keep in mind when you are analyzing and counting the number of persons residing in a household from the 1820 census. Other additional categories that were added for the first time on the 1820 census were the number of foreigners not naturalized and the number of persons, including slaves, engaged in agriculture, commerce, and manufacturing. The information contained in the 1820 census is huge for anyone researching enslaved or free colored persons. They may not have been listed by name, but for the first time they were divided into age groups, and they were also included in the occupation categories. Now, if the census taker would just have kept the original order of households instead of reorganizing them into a semi-alphabetical listing. In his address to Congress on December 28, 1828, President John Quincy Adams recommended that the census begin earlier in the year and that the collection of age data be changed to 10-year intervals, beginning at infancy and continuing, quote, to the utmost boundaries of life, end quote. The Census Act of March 23, 1830, incorporated these changes, and the official date of the census was June 1, 1830. With the addition of the state of Missouri, there were a total of 24 states in the Union at the time of the 1830 census. Those 24 states, together with the Arkansas Territory, Michigan Territory, and the New Florida Territory, made up the 1830 census. The record loss was minor when compared with prior years, with only county-wide losses in the states of Massachusetts, Michigan, and Mississippi. The expanded age categories that were enumerated on the 1830 census included the number of free white males and females under 5 years, 5 to 10 years, 10 to 15 years, 15 to 20 years, and then in 10-year increments up to 100 years and upward. Slaves and free colored persons were also listed by age in categories of under 10, 10 to 24 years, 24 to 36 years, 36 to 55 years, 55 years to 100, and 100 years and upward. New to the 1830 census were questions regarding persons who were deaf, mute, or blind. For the deaf-mute, the numbers were divided by the number of white persons and the number of slaves and colored persons who were aged under 14, 14 and under 25, and 25 and upward. For the blind, they were divided between white persons and slaves or colored persons, but not further divided by age. Like the 1820 census, a question was asked as to the number of white persons who were foreigners not naturalized. However, the earlier start date and the new age categories were not the only changes seen in the 1830 census schedules. For the first time, enumerators had printed forms on which to record the information collected. But all those expanded age categories also meant that the number of columns were expanded, and the printed form covered 2 pages. The name of the head of the family and the age categories for white males and females are noted on the first page. The age categories for the slaves and free colored persons, as well as the categories for the deaf, mute, blind, and foreigners not naturalized are all noted on the second page. When you are reviewing the 1830 census online, for example at Ancestry, the image that will be displayed on the screen will only be the first page. Make sure that you click this arrow to advance to the second page so that you can see all of the census schedule. The official date for the 1840 census was June 1st, 1840, and it covered 26 states, which included the new states of Arkansas and Michigan, as well as the Iowa Territory, Wisconsin Territory, and Florida Territory. The 1840 census was the first census to not experience any major loss of records. Like the 1830 census, the 1840 census was recorded on printed forms spanning 2 pages. 1840 included the same age and ailment categories as the 1830 census, but also included a category for both white persons and colored persons who were considered insane and idiots, which is basically what we consider today as a mental disorder. 1840 also added new questions which covered school attendance, literacy, and vocation. And the vocational questions were not just agriculture or manufacturing, as in the past. In 1840, the census takers were instructed to note the number of persons in each family employed in mining, agriculture, commerce, manufacture and trade, navigation of the ocean, navigation of canals, lakes, and rivers, and learned professional engineers. Knowing this information opens the possibility of new records for research. For example, if you're researching in New York and the column for navigation of canals, lakes, and rivers had been checked, you might want to consider researching the records for the Erie Canal to see if your ancestor was part of its construction. But one of the most significant categories added to the 1840 census from a genealogical perspective was added to the second page of the form. There in the center column, the category calls for the pensioners of revolutionary or military services included in the foregoing household, names and ages. And there on the second page in the household of William Caudell of Perry County, Kentucky, is an entry in this column, James Caudell, age 90. 2 words and 1 number that provide a number of clues. We learn that James Caudell is drawing a pension, probably for service in the Revolutionary War, and we should obtain the full pension record from the National Archives. We can deduct that James is the 90-year-old male enumerated in the household. Thus, we can summarize and hypothesize that William, listed as the head of the family, is probably the male aged 50 to 60 years old, giving us an estimated range for his birth. We can hypothesize also that James Caudell may have been the father of William. If James and William had different last names, it might provide a clue that the pensioner was the father of the wife, giving us a clue as to her maiden name. All this valuable information from those often maligned tick marks of the early census records. The official date of the 1850 census was June 1st. With the addition of the new states of Florida, Texas, Iowa, Wisconsin, and California added to the Union, there were a total of 31 states included in the census. Also enumerated were the new territories of Oregon, Minnesota, New Mexico, and Utah. The 1850 census enumeration had some dramatic changes. Gone were the tick marks of the early census schedules. Yay! And in their place was a listing of the names and ages of each member of the household. Double yay. And while it appears that in this household, that David Graham and Anna are husband and wife, and their children are William, David, Catherine, Susanna, and Nancy, we can only hypothesize that this is a family unit. The 1850 census may have included names of all individuals in the household, but it did not state relationships. The enumeration in 1850 also included profession, occupation, or trade of each male over the age of 15, the value of real estate owned, the place of birth for the person, whether or not they had been married within the year, attended school within the year, or were over the age of 20 and could not read and write. The enumeration of slaves was completed using a separate slave schedule, which recorded the name of the slave owner, the number of slaves owned, and the number of slaves manumitted or released from slavery. No names of any slaves were given, only their age, color, and sex, as well as whether they were a deaf-mute, blind, insane, idiotic, or a fugitive from the state. The official date of the 1860 census was June 1st. With the addition of Minnesota and Oregon to the Union, the census covered a total of 33 states, plus the District of Columbia, the Dakota Territory, Kansas Territory, Nebraska Territory, New Mexico Territory, and Washington Territory. There were no substantial losses in 1860. There was not much change between 1850 and 1860. The questions asked by the enumerators in 1860 were the same as were asked in 1850, but with one addition. The value of estate owned was now divided into the value of real estate and the value of personal estate. The 1860 slave schedule was also the same as 1850, with the addition of one question. It now asks for the number of slave houses. With an official date of June 1st, 1870, the census covered a total of 37 states, including the new states of West Virginia, Nebraska, Kansas, and Nevada. The 1870 enumeration also included the territories of New Mexico, Colorado, Idaho, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, Washington, Dakota, and Indiana. There were no major losses for the 1870 census. The 1870 census, taken post-Civil War, was redesigned to eliminate the separate slave schedules. Both white and persons of color were to be enumerated on the general population schedules. The same questions asked in 1860 were included in 1870 with a few new questions. The 1870 was the first census to include a parentage category asking if the father and/or mother was of foreign birth. Another column was added to include the month of birth if a child had been born within the year. This information is very helpful in narrowing down the date of birth for a child in a time when most births were not officially recorded. Lastly, a constitutional relations category was added, excuse me, which recorded two items: male citizens of the U.S. age 21 and upward, and male citizens of the U.S. age 21 and upwards whose right to vote was denied or abridged on grounds other than rebellion or other crime. The official date for the 1880 census was June 1, 1880, and enumerated 38 states, including the recently admitted state of Colorado, as well as the territories of Arizona, Dakota, Idaho, Montana, New Mexico, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. Although non-organized, Alaska was also enumerated in 1880. However, the Indian Territory, which is now the state of Oklahoma, was not enumerated for non-Indians. There were no major losses for the 1880 census. The 1880 census not only lists the names and ages of each person in the household, but was the first census to list the relationship of each member to the head of the household. This information is extremely valuable to the genealogist. Take this household, for example. Pleasant Bolton is the head of the household, enumerated with his wife, Margaret, daughter Lydia, and sons Tandy and James. There is also a male named Harrison Black enumerated in the household. In prior census records, where no relationships were listed, we would not know if he was a relative, a boarder, or even a servant. With the listing of relationship in 1880, we see that Harrison Black was Pleasant's grandson. This information suggests that one of Pleasant's daughters may have married a man with the surname of Black. Searching marriage records in Laurel and surrounding counties may provide evidence to support this hypothesis. In addition to noting the relationships, the 1880 census also included 3 other valuable pieces of information: the marital status of each person, whether single, married, widowed, or divorced, and the place of birth for both the person's father and mother. For the genealogist, census records keep getting better and better. Because June 1st fell on a Sunday, the official date of the 1890 census was June 2nd. At that time, there were 42 states in the Union, and the U.S. population was just shy of 63 million people. But most of the 1890 census population schedules were destroyed or badly damaged by a fire in the basement of the Commerce Department building in January 1921. Less than 1% of the 1890 census schedules, covering a mere 6,160 persons, survived. There remain only 3 rolls of microfilm containing only fragments for the District of Columbia and the states of Alabama, Georgia, Illinois, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Ohio, South Dakota, and Texas. The other 99% of the 1890 census has been lost to us. The official date of the census was June 1st, 1900. The census covered 45 states, the District of Columbia, the Arizona Territory, New Mexico Territory, Oklahoma Territory, and Indian Territory, the unorganized Alaska Territory, and for the first time, the Hawaii Territory. Additionally, the Departments of War and the Navy enumerated military personnel at home and abroad, including the American Samoa, Cuba, Guam, the Philippines, and Puerto Rico. With the turn of the century came many changes to the census schedules. The 1900 census was expanded to include questions in 28 categories. As in the past, the census taker inquired as to the name, relationship, color or race, sex, age, marital status, place of birth for both the person and the person's parents, occupation, and literacy. But there were also additional questions asked of each person that are valuable clues for the genealogist. Column 7 asks for the person's date of birth, month, and year. Many persons listed on the 1900 census were born before traditional birth records were kept, making this information extremely important for the genealogist. If a person was listed as married, the question was asked as to the number of years married. This provides a clue as to the year of the marriage and can narrow down the time period when researching for a marriage record. Also, If the number of years married were 5, and there were children listed in the household who were, say, 10 or 12, that might imply that there was a previous marriage to which those children were born. Columns 11 and 12 were inquired of all mothers, asking them how many children they had and how many of those children were still living. During a time when traditional death records were not kept, coupled with the missing 1890 census records, these questions can provide clues as to a family structure and point to children who may have died young. Further, if the mother had 10 children, but only stated she had been married 5 years, it may suggest a previous marriage for her, to which some or all of her children had been born. Columns 16, 17, and 18 were in regards to citizenship and asked the year of immigration, the number of years the person had been in the United States, and whether or not the person was naturalized. Using this information, we can narrow down the time period for a search of ship passenger list and naturalization records. Column 24 inquired as to whether or not the person could speak English, and if not, it might provide insight when analyzing records. Did your ancestor understand what was being asked of them? Is it possible the recorder of the record could not fully understand the answer that was given? Columns 25 through 28 related to the ownership of home. Was the home owned or rented? And if it was it owned free, meaning without a mortgage, or was it mortgaged? Was it a farm or was it a house? And if it was a farm, the enumerator was to note the identification number of the agricultural schedule. Valuable information, all of it. These questions allow us to imagine our ancestors as city dwellers or rural farmers, and it provides clues as to land records that may exist, and further information may be provided on the agricultural schedules. For the first time since the 1830 census, the official date of the 1910 census was changed from June 1st to April 15th. The census covered 46 states, the District of Columbia, and the territories of Arizona, American Samoa, Guam, Hawaii, New Mexico, Philippines, Puerto Rico, unorganized Alaska, and the Panama Canal Zone. The questions presented by the census taker in 1910 were, for the most part, the same as were asked during the 1900 census. They focused on the name, relationship, age, marital status, birthplace, occupation, and literacy. Unfortunately, however, the question asking for birth month and year was removed, and only the age of the person was once again listed in the schedules. The question on whether or not the person could speak English was expanded to include the language the person did speak if it wasn't English. For example, German, Yiddish, or French. This could provide clues as to where your ancestor may have immigrated from. The one column added to the 1910 census is very valuable to the genealogist, and that was column 30. Is the person a survivor of the Union or Confederate Army or Navy? If the answer is yes, you should be checking for military service records and possible pension records. If the soldier fought for the Union, the pensions will be at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. If the person fought for the Confederacy, any pension records will be found at the state level from which he served. The official date of the census was again changed, and the 1920 census date was January 1st, 1920. The census covered 48 states, the District of Columbia, and the territories of Alaska, American Samoa, Guam, Hawaii, Philippines, Puerto Rico, U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Panama Canal Zone. The format and information obtained for the 1920 was very similar to the 1910 census. However, the question about service in the Union or Confederate Army or Navy was removed. Also omitted from 1920 was the number of children born and how long the couple had been married. These three very important questions for the genealogists were no longer included. There were, however, 4 new questions added in 1920. One was inquiring the year of naturalization, which will help us in narrowing down our search for naturalization records. The other 3 questions were about the mother tongue of the person's father, and the person's mother. There was also a change in instructions given to the enumerator, which provide wonderful clues for the genealogist. The change resulted from some of the international boundary changes following World War I. If a person or their parents was reported to have been born in Austria-Hungary, Germany, Russia, or Turkey, the enumerator was to report the specific province, state, region, or city of birth. If a person was born in any other foreign country, however, only the name of the country was required. Knowing the specific province, state, region, or city of birth is paramount to locating and researching your ancestor in their native land. Unfortunately, not every census taker paid strict attention to the instructions, such as the census taker for my 3rd great-grandfather's household. Birthplace for Anton and his parents? Simply Germany. No province, no state, no city, no region, just Germany. The official census date was April 1st, 1930, and it covered 48 states, the District of Columbia, and the territories of Alaska, American Samoa, Guam, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Panama Canal Zone. The 1930 census was essentially the same as the census that was taken in both 1910 and 1920. The biggest change, however, was in the racial classification. Enumerators were instructed to no longer use the term mulatto for enumerating mixed-race persons, and specific instructions were given on various scenarios on whether to record the person as white, black, or American Indian. And for the first time, the term Mexican was listed as a race and used to record persons born in Mexico or whose parents were born in Mexico and they did not fall into another one of the categories. But of importance for the genealogists, the 1930 census added columns 30 and 31 relating to veterans. The question to be asked was whether a veteran of U.S. military or naval forces. In column 30, the census taker recorded yes or no. If the answer was yes, then in column 31, the census taker was asked what war or expedition, and he was to record the answer. In this enumeration of my 2nd great uncle, John W. Jordan, as you can see, he answered yes to the question, and the census taker wrote WW in the column for the name of the war. This would be World War I. There was no Roman numeral 1 added because at the time of the 1930 census, only one World War had actually occurred. In 1940, the official census date was April 1st, 1940. Like the 1930 census, the census of 1940 enumerated 48 states, the District of Columbia, and the territories of Alaska, American Samoa, Guam, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Panama Canal Zone. The 1940 census covers the same basic information as collected in previous years, mainly the name, age, family relationship, place of birth, education, and citizenship. For the genealogists, there were a few new questions that can assist with research on persons who were located in the 1940 census. Up to this point, it was unknown who provided the information to the census taker, and a researcher was unable to analyze the reliability of that information. In 1940, however, the census taker noted which person in the household provided the information, usually by placing an X in a circle next to their name. In the household of my great-grandparents, the census taker noted that my great-grandmother, Faye Jordan, provided the information on the family by placing an X in a circle next to her name. The 1940 census also added a column in which the census taker recorded the location of residence for each person in 1935. Since the census is taken every 10 years, having the information of residence at the midway point could be a valuable clue, especially if your ancestors moved around a lot. Over the years, the census had provided statistical information for the growing nation. Up to this point, they had only experimented with probability sampling, but it was incorporated into the 1940 census, allowing for additional demographic questions without increasing the size of the census. Each census page denoted 2 lines where additional information was requested of the person listed there. These sampling lines were denoted by abbreviations for supplemental questions within double lines in the margin. This indicated that the person was to be asked the additional supplemental questions. If your person of interest has this notation next to their name in the 1940 census, you will want to scroll down to the bottom of the page where the supplemental questions are located. My great-grandmother Faye was selected for the supplemental questions. She was asked for the birthplace of her father and mother, which was no longer being asked of every person in 1940. She was asked the language spoken in the home in her earliest childhood, whether or not she served in the military, and whether or not she had a federal Social Security number. They also recorded her usual occupation. And since she was a woman, she was asked 3 additional questions. Had she been married more than once? What was her age at first marriage? And the number of children ever born, not including stillbirth. All very valuable information to the genealogist, and unfortunately only provided for 2 of the persons listed on any census page. The census has continued to be taken in 10-year intervals from 1950 to the current census of 2020. However, due to privacy reasons, federal law requires that there be a 72-year wait period before each census is released. The 1950 census will be available for release to the public in April 2022. But for now, we have the U.S. Census records available from 1790 through 1940, 150 years of records for us to use in search of our ancestors. And while some schedules are no longer available, whether lost or destroyed, the ones that remain provide us with valuable clues. As you have seen, the records go far beyond just names, dates, places, or tick marks. Each year provided its own special set of instructions for the census taker. Those schedules provide so many clues for our research if we just take the time to look for them. Slow down, take that time, actually read the headings for each census. As I said earlier, census records are the low-hanging fruit, the giver of clues, the friend of the genealogist. They are one of the first resources that you should access and analyze early in the research process. Locate the census records for each year of your ancestor's life. Compare them to each other, mine them for clues, and build a research plan. I hope that I have given you some insight as to the value of the U.S. Census records. The handout provides a recap of the information on each census year, as well as some other resources that you may find helpful. If you have any questions, you may direct them to me at my email address shown on the handout, or you may contact Denise at the Tarpon Springs Library by email. Her email address is shown here, dmanning@ctsfl.us, or you may call her and ask for Denise by calling the library at 727-943-4922. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. I wish you all the best in your research.